Hey guys, it's MB. If you saw my last video where I talked about every fucking retard who's proud of making growing up for me nothing but a living hell, one of the things I got into later in the video is how they expect me to act like nothing ever happened, because they know it only hurts me even more, and it clearly doesn't help addressing any of this to anyone who I should be able to turn to, because they are no different than they are. And speaking of that, that's exactly what I'm going to talk about in this video. I'm going to talk about why forcing a victim to get over severe trauma and pretend to be fine actually makes things much, much worse. So, first off, unless they're sadistic, the person forcing the victim to be fine is often deluded with the lie that it magically heals the victim from all of their trauma, but in reality it actually prevents healing and even closure. This is because when we don't address hurt to anyone we should be able to turn to, we're not actually allowing ourselves to process the emotions associated with it, because we're just being ignored, which leads to unresolved trauma and lingering pain, which of course makes it difficult to move forward. And pretending to be fine can make a barrier to build healthy relationships in the future, but that's clearly because addressing hurt only destroys the healthy relationship, as past hurts unconsciously influence how we interact with others. Next up is how victims retain resentment towards their perpetrators, because suppressed emotions can manifest and turn into resentment, which impacts our overall well-being and relationships with anyone, whether it's the perpetrator or the person forcing the victim to be fine. And when we don't address hurt, or when we're ignored, we clearly start to feel like a victim, in which if we are a victim of these horrible things, then we are, which leads to bitterness and negativity, again, whether it's to the perpetrator or anyone forcing the victim to be fine. And all this can even lead to harmful behavior, because by constantly being ignored and being forced to pretend to be fine, what the person forcing the victim to be fine is actually doing is that they're unknowingly causing the victim to start acting violent, even if the victim's acting violent secretly, because they clearly don't know, like they don't realize what they've caused the victim to do, but it's possible that they knew the victim was going to do that. They just couldn't care for it. The person forcing the victim to be fine was too lazy to support the victim. Of course, when victims engage in violent behavior, it does create a constant cycle of pain, and it causes the victim to want to get revenge in, of course, people who hurt them on purpose, especially the ones who have narcissistic tendencies. And next is that so I first said at the beginning that it prevents healing, which in turn it prevents personal growth, because personal growth is crucial from being hurt. But if we're constantly being ignored and forced to be fine, then we're suppressing our emotions. This is literally what I've done. Like, I've constantly suppressed my emotions because no one cared for my side of the story. And even though I've developed self-awareness, I've never been able to express my true emotions to people, because if I do, then they don't care. They force me to pretend like I'm fine, and it's prevented me from setting healthy boundaries or making healthy relationships with anyone, because it makes me assume that everyone is going to not care about my issues. So yeah, I know I got a bit into myself for a bit, but it does apply for victims like me, of course. And lastly is that it damages relationships, and clearly this is because if you're constantly forcing a victim to pretend like they were never hurt, then you're only damaging your relationship with them. You're not actually helping them. You're only damaging your relationship with them. You're not actually helping them feel better. You don't want to have to put up with their hurt. Like, you don't want to have to put up with their trauma just because you're not bothered to help them. So in conclusion, forcing a victim to get over severe trauma and pretend like it never happened not only makes things worse, but the person doing that is only making themselves feel better. They're not actually helping the victim. They don't want to because they can't be bothered to actually... Like, they are extremely apathetic. They can't be bothered to hear their side of the story, or even feel what it was like, think what it was like to have gone through what they went through. So yeah, that does it for today's video. I hope I explained this the best way I could, and I hope you all have a great day.